everybody, and welcome to the 12th episode here of the K2 podcast. I got a really special treat for you guys tonight. We have a wonderful guest who will be joining us. Her name is Alison Pena. Alison is a lifelong New Yorker. She's lives in Manhattan. She was a primary caregiver until her husband of 25 years, David, died in her arms at home after an 11-month battle with pancreatic cancer. Alison's learned a lot about living fearlessly, even in the face of death as a widow. She's faced pervasive assumptions that she was broken by her loss. As a result, she was isolated and lonely, but could not find the resources to answer her challenges, so she created them. She's began a blog, which you can find at badwidow.com, and she's unafraid of ruffling feathers and having provocative conversations on life and death. So here with us today is wonderful Alison Pena, aka the Bad Widow herself. Thanks for joining us, Alison.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, I'm glad that you were able to join us this evening. So why don't you give everybody a little bit of background here? I see that you have a photo there in the background that looks like a painting. What's that all about?
So my husband was an artist, a professional artist. As a result, I have 800 paintings of
Really?
his. Paintings and drawings, landscapes, cityscapes, portraits. And so this is a painting, behind me is a painting of the Pan Am building, which is now the MetLife building. It's where Grand Central is. So the base of it is Grand Central.
That's a really awesome painting. I actually love it. Did you have a couple others? I think you had a few other ones behind you there as well, didn't you?
I have a bunch. So what I've done since I have all these paintings is I've made them into backgrounds for my Zooms.
That's awesome.
So I'll roll you through a few of the
Yeah, let's
paintings
do that. Let's do that, please.
just for fun. So this is Maine. This is a place that we go in Maine. It's an island off of Rockland, which is about 2 hours north of Portland. And this is a sunset.
Wow. You can really see the canvas there. I can see the texture of the canvas. That looks awesome.
Really gritty.
Yes.
This is a stoop in
Wow.
Greenwich Village. This is an upstairs bedroom.
He had an amazing talent. Yeah, just amazing looking at.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I wish
A
I could paint that way.
storm. Oh, I know, me too. This is kind of a storm. This is also Maine,
Wow.
and a couple of flower paintings.
That's awesome. I'm really impressed by his talent. That's amazing. Has he ever tried to monetize those, or was it something he only did for fun, or?
No, he was a professional artist. That's how he made his money.
Nice. That's the best thing, to being able to make
Yep,
money doing something you love to do. I think that's the best way you can live. You know what I mean? So that's
it
great.
really is. It really is. It's incredible.
So, well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the loss of your husband? The paintings are wonderful, and I know there's kind of a sad part to it, but how could you go into a little depth on that?
So my husband was not feeling well in 2015, and we went to the ER 3 times. We went to urgent care twice. Nobody could figure out what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then in October of 2015, we went to the doctor and he got a CAT scan, and the doctor said, "You have to come in today." That's never a good sign. When the
Yeah,
doctor says
absolutely.
you have to come in today,
Yeah.
you automatically go,
Yep.
"This is not good." And he said, "You have stage 4 pancreatic cancer."
Ouch.
And I don't know if you know the trajectory for that, but basically, with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, typically you're going to die in 6 weeks to 4 months.
Mm.
So we were suddenly looking at, okay, our lifespan together, and we had known each other pretty close to half my life,
Mm-hmm.
um, was soon going to end. And the doctors kept saying, okay, slow down, just relax, do less.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did instead, and I think this is really important for these times as well, what we did instead was we reprioritized. So we looked at what really mattered to us.
Sure. I think everybody, I mean, I shouldn't generalize it, but you tend to hear that with everybody who faces death. I mean, there's a good country song about it, I'm sure that you've heard, where he goes, I went skydiving. You know, that song, it's just like
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you're faced with those things, it really kind of puts things into perspective. So it's an interesting take that you have there.
Yeah, and this is sort of the crisis and the opportunity of any loss or transition. So the loss of a loved one, but we're in a massive period of turmoil right now. So, economically, with health, there's just so much uncertainty.
Certainly.
And so the the thing we knew was certain, or almost certain, was that my husband would be dead in as short as 6 weeks, and
Hmm.
anything beyond that was, you know, borrowed time we
Sure.
fought for.
Sure.
Um, so what we decided to do was we decided to live fearlessly. We decided to start knocking stuff off our bucket list.
Right.
Um, and he loved his art, and he loved to play tennis. And so I started really pushing him to, within the limits of his energy, to do those things he loved most.
Right.
Because, you know, we put off the stuff that matters most because maybe we'll be embarrassed, or maybe we won't make a good showing.
Sure.
But when you're literally watching someone you love that much going towards death,
Sure.
there's not too much to be afraid of.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because when you think of it, I mean, it's kind of maybe a harsh take, but what do you have to lose? You know, what can you lose? You're facing death anyway. You might as well kind of just put it all out there and just, have at it. You know what I mean? There's not a whole lot you have to lose. So, and I'm sure in some way he probably appreciated that support that you gave him to push him and just say, and be there by his side, and like really just be there for him in a time where he had a lot of uncertainty and didn't know what to do. And I bet you brought a lot of balance to him and encouragement. So I'm sure he appreciated that a lot. So it's amazing to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I just shunted all the logistical stuff away.
Mm-hmm.
If he didn't love doing it, he loved being with friends, he loved painting, he loved playing tennis.
I
So he
wish I
was
could play
typically,
tennis. I'm not
yeah,
agile enough.
no, neither am I. He was USPTA certified.
That's awesome.
But as he was 6'3",
Mm-hmm.
and I'm 5'3", and he went from 265 pounds to 146
After the
by the end.
cancer.
Yep.
Mm.
By the time he died. So I weighed 30 or 40 pounds more than he did by the time he died.
Mm-hmm.
But he played tennis. He was typically very self-critical, and in the end, he would go out to play tennis. And I remember one time he literally stretched his length across the tennis court. He fell because
Oh
his
man.
balance was off, and he picked himself up and went and played.
Wow.
So he just got much gentler with himself as he was facing this. And he also painted his last painting the Thursday before he died.
And he completed that?
He did.
That's awesome. That's
His last
amazing.
commission.
So let me ask, so as you like, what I hear you talk about some of the bold things that you've done, but could you go into a little bit more depth? What were some more of the activities and things that you guys accomplished when you talk about knocking things off your bucket list, so to speak? Exactly what was that type of stuff?
Well, I mean, for me, I had wanted to stand on stages and talk about my work and sing in cabaret shows. I had
Mm-hmm.
sung in choirs forever. We sing in my family. So we
Mm-hmm.
sing 3 generations in my family since I was a child. It's a really big thing in my life.
That's awesome.
But I wanted to stand on a cabaret stage
Uh-huh.
in a little club and sing my own songs.
That's awesome.
3
That's
songs.
amazing. Did you have any fears about getting up on the stage, or did you feel a certain responsibility because you're there to support him and push him in a way that you felt that you had to exemplify that, and does that
No,
make sense?
yeah, it had more to do with staying whole myself. So there was so much that was, and I think this is true for people who are caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
I was so taken up with just that role that it was really
True.
hard to remember that I was a woman and I was, smart and competent. And I was, at times when I wasn't necessarily feeling like any of those things. And
Mm-hmm.
so the songs that I chose were to remind myself that I was more than what I was living through. Because at some point he was going to be gone and I was going to be living into a completely unknown future.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the course of the time while he was dying, I sang on 4 stages and I spoke on 3.
And he was able to attend those?
He attended the early one. By the last show I did was the Tuesday before the Saturday he died.
Mm-hmm.
And he shoved me out the door. He was on oxygen and we
Okay.
couldn't count on the oxygen tank lasting through the show.
Sure.
So,
That makes sense. Well, so
yeah.
let me ask. So, how did you handle this type of thing when it started to go downhill and he really started to deteriorate and everything, the fun stuff kind of started to decline? How did you handle those feelings? Expect like where did how did you go about that? What was your go to?
It's really challenging because, especially because I wasn't the one who was sick,
Mm-hmm.
but I was certainly impacted
Sure.
by the man I'd loved for 25 years dying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I heard a lot, well, I'm the one who's sick. He's the one who's sick.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so one of the things that I did for both of us is I created this little meditation where I would say, okay, we're filling up with love from our toes to the tops of our heads.
Mm-hmm.
And I would do it like waves. Okay, the waves are lapping over your toes and up, all the way up, right?
Yeah.
And that was a practice that I started. And so when he died, we fought not to have him go into hospice.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted him to die at home
I'm sure.
and for
Yeah.
it just to be us,
Makes sense.
and you get a lot of pressure at the end to shove people into the hospital. But as long as I could manage it, I was not going to do that. And so the last day I heard, on my Pandora, Ghost came on, the theme song from Ghost.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, this is it. This is the
Interesting.
day.
So let me ask. I'm sure it's very difficult for you. So I apologize for that. But
It's okay.
how did you? So when you talk about the meditation practices and things like that, was that
Yep.
is that where you came up with the affluence code, or is that where that started? Because that's how I originally came across you on YouTube, and I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. And I saw one of your public speaking events on there, so I was
Yep.
like, that's what I was like. Wow, she's got some really interesting takes on this stuff. I should reach out to her, and that's how I came across you. So is that how this came about? Is that where it came from?
So the affluence code is something that informs a lot of the stuff that I do. What I discovered with the affluence code is that there are 3 primary focuses that everyone has, and everyone does all of these,
Mm-hmm.
right? So none of them is excluded. The first is doing impeccable work. These people, they love to work. That's where they feel most themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The second is, and that was one I called purpose, the lens called purpose. The second is nurturing one-on-one relationships. That's the lens called love. These people, when they are feeling really good, they're fabulous to be around.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows some of these people,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
You just, as long as they themselves are well, they're wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third is one I call charity, and that's serve a thriving ecosystem. So because I knew that my husband was purpose, loved to work,
Mm-hmm.
he would have died much faster if I hadn't pushed him, allowed him, encouraged him to work.
Sure.
And mine is charity first, which is serve a thriving ecosystem. So sharing the journey that I was on, being of service to other people, that fed me.
Okay.
So one of the ways to get back to yourself and back to being resourceful and resilient again is to sink into your zone of genius. Okay, your area of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And just start doing that.
Okay, well, so that makes a lot of sense. So how is one of the questions I have down here is how taking strategic action congruent with who you are, unlocking your affluence code leads to effortless and immediate results consistently. Well, could you explain a little bit about that and what that means?
Totally. When my husband was working,
Mm-hmm.
people saw him work, saw how impeccable he was, and offered him more.
Mm-hmm.
In talking about and sharing about the journey through all of this, in being vulnerable, brave, visible, transparent about everything that was going on,
Mm-hmm.
the good times and the bad times, I was serving my community, right? So I was being fed. Now, for example, I have applied in 2020 to 106 podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
So what? I've been booked on 26.
Well,
I mean, that's amazing, right?
Sure.
But people heard me, saw me, and reached out because what I was talking about was important.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you're in your zone, the thing that you're greatest at, organically everything begins to happen. Synchronicity sort of lines up, so you'll get the opportunities that you want. One of the joys about knowing who you are in this particular way
Mm-hmm.
is that there's so many choices of what to do, so many businesses, so many opportunities, so
Sure.
many relationships, so many everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can't screen it down, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
If you screen it down based on who you are, then you're picking the right choices. That means your success rate organically goes up. Do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense.
Right? So someone who's great with one-on-one relationships, they're going to be miserable if you put them behind a computer.
Sure.
Someone who's good at getting stuff done, and this happens a lot in companies, someone whose purpose, they're good at getting stuff done. If you put them managing people, the teams will begin to fall apart because they're terrible with people.
Sure. That makes sense.
And you've seen this.
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked in management for over 5 years, and I had some coworkers that weren't, like you say, some of them were actually really good at doing their job, but when it came to managing the people, they didn't have that connection. So that's a great point.
Yeah, so your bad managers are typically going to be people who are purpose first. But you absolutely want them getting the stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
They're amazing at it. But companies don't typically look at it like this. So if you have someone on your team who's a love first, nurturing one-on-one relationships, the team's going to operate much more seamlessly. They're great at customer service.
Mm-hmm.
If you have someone who's charity, which is my first, they can see what works, what doesn't work, and how to fix it.
True.
The only thing about this kind of person is that if they are not allowed to fix the things that are wrong, they're a horrible employee. I'm a terrible employee, and I love to work.
So that's interesting you bring that up, because I had a guest on a couple episodes back. Her name is Rihanna Milne. She's a life and love coach. She's really was a great guest to have on. But that was some of the things that she had talked about, was some of the past things that, whether it be from childhood or wherever these traumas come from, go on with you into your adult life and affect the way you work, your relationships, and all the things that you get involved with. So, to hear you kind of speak about that as well, I think it really speaks to what people are facing, and you have to resolve those issues if you're going to be able to move on and kind of, I guess, I don't know the correct word. I guess that was, you have to be able to move on and get past all of that to be successful and things like that. But can you tell me a little bit, like, is there a way to curate your like personal and professional networks proactively so that they deliver the resources you need effortlessly? Like, how do you? Hopefully, that's kind of a good transition. But how do you go about that?
So, um, what I found there, I'm just going to step you through sort of the three things that I wind up doing with people.
Mm-hmm.
So, after a loss or transition, you need to heal. There's lots of feelings.
Right.
Grief, fear, anger, and we're seeing this now. We have a health crisis and an economic crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of feelings. We're in the middle of a massive period of transformation.
Right.
So that's sort of the first thing, because you stuff down the feelings, you've got a volcano
Mm-hmm.
that will erupt at some
Mm-hmm.
point, probably the worst point. The second thing is to figure out what you want. So in a changed world, we don't go back. We can't go back.
That's true.
And people say, I wish I could,
Yep.
but there was a time
I'm
you,
guilty of that myself. I've done that a bunch of times. I wish, yeah, I wish,
yeah, things change. Even good things change. So you
Mm-hmm.
have a child, and there's the relationship that you had before, and then there's the relationship you have as a family. It's awesome, but it's different.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going back. And so in a time of transition, that happens. And it's necessary to take a look at your priorities as they are now and really make distinctions of what do you want and what's the best way to ask to get
Sure.
it. And the clarity piece is critical, because the thing I discovered as Bad Widow
Mm-hmm.
is we think people don't want to give us what we ask for,
Mm-hmm.
or we're embarrassed or ashamed or awkward about asking.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found out was that people absolutely wanted to give me what I was asking for, but they didn't want to get it wrong. People walk on eggshells around a widow. And so if they couldn't get it right, they weren't going to try.
That's interesting.
Yep. If I could be specific enough
Mm-hmm.
that they could win every single time,
Mm-hmm.
it upped my rate of success in asking. So now I'll get to the piece that you were asking
Sure.
about.
Well, just before you go, not to distract you, but did you
Yeah.
find that that also translate into success in your career when you or you so are you not to go way off a topic here, but you've heard of, I'm assuming, like The Secret? Are you familiar
Mm-hmm.
with that? Or maybe, like, I noticed that's one big thing, that clear and concise message, whether you write it down and wake up and recite it for 20 minutes every day or whatever it may be. Also, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill was one of my first ever books that, I mean, I was so
Yeah, I love that.
captivated by it. I couldn't put it down. I think I knocked it out in like 2 days. I was just done with it. I just
It's a
flew
great
right through.
book.
It's an excellent book. I mean, it still resonates with me today. So you do find, because I have to be honest here, because I believe, our conversation should definitely be an honest one. So that was one part that I always lacked in, was not being specific in what I had wanted. I read the stuff and I'm like, oh, it sounds great, but I never really fully committed to it. Did you genuinely find, like, give us your customer review? Did you find that it helped you out when you, like, I mean, it sounds like that's what you're saying.
It's absolutely what I'm saying. People don't get what they want because they're either too vague or too small. So
Okay.
too vague is because they're afraid they might not get it. It's something they really want and they're afraid they might not get it. Too small is if it doesn't make your heart sing,
Mm-hmm.
you're not that excited about asking for it, and nobody else is excited about giving it to you.
That makes a lot of sense. That
Okay,
makes a
too
lot of
vague or too
sense.
small. So when I was really specific about what I was asking, then it they could win. They could be my hero.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a mutually beneficial relationship. But here's the key. This is the thing that you asked me about, which I'm circling back
Sure.
around to.
Sure.
How do you have a network that delivers? So if we think about networks, we think only in business about networks.
Mm-hmm.
Are you getting the referrals you need to grow your business? We
Mm-hmm.
talk a lot in this way.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, we exist in networks all the time in all aspects of our lives. Who are you going to talk to about one thing, and then who do you talk to about something else?
Sure.
Right? It's
Right.
not the same person
No, it's not.
necessarily.
It's not. It's not at all.
And who do you go to the gym with or go to a bar with?
Mm-hmm.
And who do you ask a really big favor or a small favor? Who do you ask to babysit?
Mm-hmm.
And who do you ask to loan you money and fund a new business?
Right.
They're different people, right?
Sure. Sure.
But we don't think about our networks as resources in this particular way. They sort of grow by default. People rise up into positions and then they're just there and they're
Mm-hmm.
part of our network.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not thinking about what are they delivering within the network? How are we mutually serving each other? Right? Until you make an assessment of your network, you don't know
Mm-hmm.
if it's doing what you want it to do, if it's the optimal resource you want. So I go through a process and I have people assess their networks, look at all areas of their lives and the people who are really important in the different roles in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
and see how they're doing, you know? And if there are gaps, and there are always gaps,
Uh-huh.
start looking around for people who can rise into those roles.
Right.
Because once you know what's missing, you can fill it.
Mm-hmm.
Until you know what's missing.
So that makes a lot of sense. So let me ask, what is when you take a look at your network? How does
Mm-hmm.
that all come in? You say you may go to this person for that thing or this person for this, but where does it all come together at some point, or does it come together, or what is the outcome or the goal of analyzing your network, and what is the end of it? How does it look like coming out on the other side once you've analyzed on who your network is and things like that?
So your end goal is to create, basically to design rather than by default, but by
Mm-hmm.
design, a network, a community of people who can deliver anything you might ask of them. So, for example, if you were thinking that you might want to start a business, you might want to start looking around and cultivating people who would have the funds
Good point.
that could support you with that.
Sure.
So it comes back to you. What do you want? That's why the sort of second step is figure out what you want.
Right.
Until you know what you want, you don't know who you need in your network to deliver it.
That's a great point. That kind of circles back to what you were saying earlier. Okay, so let me ask this, just to kind of play devil's advocate, maybe. What would you say to somebody that would maybe be like, well, it sounds like you're just doing a bunch of asking, and where's the give in it, or why, like, you're just gonna stick your hand out there with this clear and concise message and expect people to give you things? So what would be the response to a person like that?
It's a totally valid point. There tends to be, people look at these network interactions
Mm-hmm.
as a kind of a balance sheet sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not. I mean, I was married for 20 years with the same guy 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
There were times there was more in my bucket and times when there was more in his bucket.
Sure.
So there needs to be a willingness to have an ebb and flow. It can't be one person giving all the time.
Sure.
But in a crisis situation, one person is going to need more.
Right.
And then when they have more, when they themselves are more filled up, they'll have the resources to give more.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I think one thing that my personal response to that would be something along the lines is I think I have a couple of things on it. One for me would be
Hmm.
one, do what you say you're going to do. So if you make promises, when you do have these clear and concise thoughts and you're saying, "Hey, I'm going to do this," you better do hold your end of the bargain up. You may get what you need,
Hmm.
but you need to
Hmm.
hold your end of the bargain up. But in addition to that, also I think about not is also reciprocating it, not just in by doing what you say you're going to do, but when you talk in a situation like maybe you're looking for business loans and things like that, having a clear and concise message could mean something as far as a contract and repaying that debt and things like that. And that kind of goes in with saying do what you say you're going to do. So I think when you do ask for something and you do say, hey, this is my plan, this is my goal, it's clear and concise, but to
Yep.
stick to that and hold up to that and do what you say you're going to do, I think would be the best response to somebody that, may have that attitude of, well, you're just asking and asking,
Hmm.
what do I get for my money? You know what I mean? So that may be one way to address it, I was thinking.
Well, the other thing about it is nobody loves a victim.
Sure.
We take care of the victims, but nobody loves a victim.
That's true.
So throughout, I was the real tipping point when I basically became bad widow. I came out of my husband dying, and I could barely get out of bed. I
I'm
would
sure.
lie in bed, and I would think of a reason to put my foot on the floor every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And my energy was really variable. My first job, and I had been a medical editor for an advertising firm, a consultant. I couldn't do any of that.
Sure.
I had gaps in my memory a semi could drive through.
Sure.
I had the attention span of
So
a
you would
fruit
just
fly.
blank out, kind of just go out of it.
Impossible. And so the first job I took, what I realized was, and this is important for these times as well, to to honor the energy that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not a loser if one day you have less energy and another day you have more.
Mm-hmm.
When you have lots of energy, go as fast as you can. When you have less energy, fill yourself up, go
Sure.
for a walk, do
Sure.
more self-care. Um, and so it's important to not be a victim in the matter. The
Absolutely.
place when I decided I was not broken,
Yeah.
that I could not be broken,
And gonna take a stand.
I took a stand.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we do a lot of shaming in our culture, and this is one of the things that really worries me about right now.
Mm-hmm.
We do a lot of shaming about not being able to work,
Mm-hmm.
about getting sick,
Mm-hmm.
about all of this has dumped down on our head. I live in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
We have more than 25,000 dead here,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So it's just come down on our head, and that will sort. I'm concerned that we not shame ourselves and shame each other about stuff we can't help.
That's
So,
true. That's a very good point, and that's one thing I've really kind of been working hard to not do. Because I'm a
mhm,
human. I'm not perfect. But I think it also comes with fear,
mhm,
inconsistency, not knowing what the future holds. I think a lot of people's response is to respond in a way that you're speaking of, and shame and stuff like that. So I think that will also, if you can develop, I think this is a great point when when you begin to develop a clear and concise path and desire for
mhm.
what you want, you can maybe alleviate some of that uncertainty and some of those things that you may be feeling, and don't have to go down that road of shaming people or putting others
Yep.
in, and projecting onto others your bad intentions or your uncertainty or whatever it may be. So I think of what you're bringing up in your message here is kind of, it really rings true. I agree with you 100%.
And the people who need structure, they need to design their own structures, because otherwise they're not going to thrive. I mean,
Sure.
it's an important moment to figure out, what do you need to thrive?
Mm-hmm.
What do you personally, each of you, need to thrive?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because once you know that, then you can put it into place
Mm-hmm.
yourself. We can't count on the outside environment to do that for us right now.
Right.
We can't.
I agree. No, you're right. If you're, and that's sometimes I think a good way to do it right now is, and like right now, one of my biggest struggles or obstacles is the news. Whether you're, on the left or the right, regardless of where you stand, the news is a huge like stressor. It's hard.
Woo!
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's up and down. I mean, no matter where you stand, it's very, it's just mind-boggling on what's going on. So it's kind of interesting, my take is I've kind of been trying to step back from that a little bit and kind of focus on some of the things that I do want to happen, not so much buy into the hype of what's scaring me, what's giving me that uncertainty. As I spoke with you before the show, I have a child, so part of me has that little bit of fear, like, oh no, what should I do? I have a kid, but at the same time, I want her to see her pop as a strong man, somebody's going to provide, take care of her, and provide that certain, that strong role model in her life. So you have to find that
Yep.
balance. So I don't know if that makes sense. It's tricky sometimes.
No, it makes perfect sense. But maybe what you provide is not what you would traditionally provide. Like like what's happening is what we're able to do for ourselves and for each other has changed, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not us. It's the environment. So when the environment has knocked us sideways, and
Mm-hmm.
life does, it tumbles us sometimes, then how do you, it's not the external world that's going to steady you again.
True.
It's you finding your own grounding. So how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
What are your methods for doing that? Because once you've got a foundational grounding for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
then you're back to resourceful and resilient. Then
Right.
you can take baby steps.
Makes sense. So how? Let me ask you. This leads into my next question a little bit. How is the process of healing from this, a loss or some, or any other transition, such as downsizing from a bigger home to a smaller home, getting a
Mhm.
divorce, or having a financial issue in the home? How does healing from a loss like that, what is that? How do you go about that?
It's really acknowledging. So, one of the tough ones is divorce.
Mm-hmm.
So, typically, a divorce, when you marry someone, you don't expect it to end in divorce
Mm-hmm.
ever.
Sure. At least I hope not.
I mean,
I don't
that's
know.
not
You
how
got some
people.
of those women out there that marry for the money. I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying in general. I'm just teasing.
Yeah, but even they don't want to marry. They don't want. They
Yeah, they
probably have
don't want it to
prenups.
end. Yeah, they don't want it to end. Yeah, that's funny.
But if you think about that, you don't go in thinking that it's going to end.
Right.
So whether or not it's by choice, there's some grieving. You
Mm-hmm.
sell a house to move to a new house. There's some grieving the old house.
Sure.
There's a lot of memories in there. And we tend to try and skate over those feelings,
Mm-hmm.
just to coast over them, to ignore them. And that's a really bad idea. It's also a really bad idea to wallow in them.
Sure. And could you explain a little bit about the three levels of loss? Because you're kind of talking about, some of the emotions that are attached with it, not wallowing in your fears. What are those three levels?
Um, at the first level, it's just how do you make it through the day?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get yourself back? How do you know that you're a competent person again?
Mm-hmm.
How do you remember that you're more than just, I mean, after Dave died, I was living this wasteland of grief.
Mm-hmm.
I woke up every day and tried to think of a reason to stay alive that day
Sure.
for almost a year, for a long time. And then they go back and forth with all kinds of feelings, and sometimes I was happy and sometimes I was not happy. And then it was, okay, I need to push out of my own barriers,
Mm-hmm.
because it's easy when we're hurt to contract,
Right.
but the natural way is to contract, integrate the feelings, and this is kind of the first phase, and expand again.
Mm-hmm.
Contract, integrate, expand.
Mm-hmm.
It's not natural to stay expanded. It's not natural to stay contracted. And then the next thing is reinvent yourself. Who are you now? Do you even know? And then once you reinvent yourself, clarity, distinctions, all the stuff I was talking about. And what that required for me was start working.
Mm-hmm.
My first job, I worked in a fellow widow's pop-up store, Halloween pop-up store, because I couldn't do the work I did,
Mm-hmm.
but I could hang a hanger up
Sure.
with
Yeah,
a
and I
costume.
think it's just getting a little bit of just some kind of movement, activity, maybe anything that could take your mind away from it for that short period of time would be a positive thing.
Exactly. You start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You take where you are, and then you start pushing against the fears and the barriers and the barricades. And the hardest thing I did actually was open myself back up to loving, to
Right.
being willing to seek love.
Right. I remember you mentioned that. I want to get to a little bit of that a little bit later. What is the third
The third
healing?
is going back out into the world,
Okay.
is really,
Okay.
really fully thriving. So going back into
Right.
community, going back into work, going back into really starting to take back life.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. All right. So when you start to take back life, you say you began on your dating ventures. Tell me a little bit about that. What kind of did you have any fears? Were you apprehensive or about, I was married once before. Would he have wanted this? Or what were your feelings and thoughts on that?
Well, I'll give you a little scenario.
Okay.
I was standing at I went to see a friend's show, and I was talking with this guy by the bar, and he was complaining about his divorce and his ex-wife and how, and I'm standing there and I'm thinking, at what point do I tell him my husband is dead?
Was that going to be your pickup line or is that how you're going to get in there? I mean,
I was literally going, you know, he's complaining about this, and here I've got that,
right. That
Um,
makes sense.
yeah. So I decided I was terrified. I would go on Bumble, which is a dating app.
I'm familiar with Bumble.
The last time I dated was 1992,
So what was your, I mean,
and it was 2018.
so not to throw you completely off your story here, but what was your initial thoughts about online dating? Was it just a total like weird thing or were you like excited by it? What were your thoughts on online dating? Cuz me personally, I've tried it. I'll be honest, I've tried it and I've got to say it on in some ways it's okay. But on other ways, I feel like it makes it so hard to develop a real connection. And also, for me personally, I've done where I have this problem where I talk with somebody online and it allows me the opportunity to create how I want them to be in my own head. And then I actually meet them and it's not the person that I expected. And you wasted a lot of
Right.
time and investment and talking to that person, and it's not the person that you had envisioned it would be. So, did you experience anything like that through your trials and tribulations, or was it a hit right off the bat?
No, it was hilarious. I was completely terrified. But basically, what I did was I decided that I just wanted to start doing things I liked with men. And so I wanted to, go listen to music, and I wanted to do this. So I wrote my profile to be very specific to who I was.
Mm hmm.
I didn't worry about them,
Sure.
because if they wanted who I was, then they would be attracted to that profile.
Sure.
And if they didn't, then I didn't want them anyway.
Makes
So,
sense. But I'm sure you had some guys that probably, because as a man, I have some friends that are questionable. Okay? And I got to tell you, sometimes I'm like, why are you talking to that girl? And I was like, she's nothing like you, bro. Like, well, you're not, that's not your type of chick. Why are you reaching out to her? So
right, right.
did you deal with any of that where guys maybe they were looking for something other than just a relationship or they didn't really care about the interest, or how did you filter through all that stuff?
Well, I looked through, and I basically treated it like an advertising campaign.
Okay.
I, I, I had my profile, and I got responses. And if I didn't like the responses I was getting, or the kind of guys who were coming to me from what I had, I would change the profile a little bit, until by the time I actually went out with anyone, I was only meeting great, interesting guys. I
Okay.
had pruned it down, and that's the be clear. What did I want?
Sure, you were making it even more clear, taking away any ambiguous stuff in as part of your profile. So that's interesting. Well, let me ask you this because I'm not sure if
Stack
it
the
was
deck.
on one of your yeah, that's a great way to put it. But I'm not sure if I saw this on one of your videos or maybe I saw it on your website or something to the effect that you hacked Bumble. Is that what you're
I
referring
hacked
to?
Bumble.
So tell me about that. What does that mean exactly?
I I treated it like a show. I'm like, okay, well, I this guy was way too snarky. I didn't like that.
Sure.
This one was, I developed really specific screens because the point was, did they like the me that I was?
Right.
If they were
That's
trying to have me
important.
be other, then I wasn't. I was a hot mess.
Sure.
I
Well,
was
you
a
were just
hot
coming
mess.
off of the death of your husband. You're also trying to get back out into the world and reinvent yourself. Had a lot of things going on, and so I can understand to that. I can relate to that.
I also, if you're with someone for 25 years and that's the only
That's another
person
thing.
whose
Yeah.
arms you've had around you, whose skin you know that,
Right.
how that person feels, he was a certain height, nobody felt right. So
Right.
I had literally couldn't trust my own body chemistry.
I can understand that. I know exactly what you mean. It makes a lot of sense. So when you say that you hacked Bumble and you
Yep,
began to kind of just develop your more clear and concise stuff, did that ever
yep,
come, do you ever feel, and I don't know if you can even answer this, but did you ever feel, because I heard you mention saying, if they didn't meet this expectation, or I didn't like the start snarkiness, or I whatever it may have been, you
yep.
kind of did you just kind of write them off, or you just said, hey, that's not what I'm looking for? What did you do? Because that's one of my issues with online dating, is that maybe that he didn't have the opportunity to really show himself. Yeah, he may have been snarky, but maybe he was just trying to be funny and it didn't come across well. Or maybe you missed out on a really good person because the message didn't translate well because of the internet message. So is there something you can say to that? How did you go about that?
Well, I mean, I didn't need volume, I needed one. So I could be really specific. And I wasn't actually looking for I didn't care what height they were. I didn't care what weight they were. I didn't care about many things.
Sure.
So my I had this whole little thing about me, and then my thing about them was no Trump people, no smoking,
Uh-huh.
must love music. That's it.
So what is it about? Can I ask you why not the Trump people? What would get you about the Trump people? Why would you write that off? Because mine, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but
Yep.
I'm a Trump supporter, not in the way that you would. I'm not one of those crazy, out there Trump supporters that just go in, but I support any president. Just like when Rush Limbaugh was bashing President Obama, I didn't agree with President Obama's policies, but I don't like anyone trash talking the president. So in that way, I support every single president. So what about a Trump supporter just didn't set right with you, or why was that a no go? Do you think it would just cause problems in relationship down the line, or you wouldn't be able to talk freely, or you felt you maybe had to censor yourself?
I don't censor myself,
Okay,
so it
sure.
would have caused problems pretty quickly.
Hmm.
Um,
So is that with the assumption that a Trump supporter wouldn't be open to hearing what you have to say?
um, that I dated one guy who trended that way
So you
more
had a
than
bad
any others.
experience and he just ruined it for everybody.
No, no, I mean it's pretty much I actually have tons of friends who
Hmm.
say the same.
Hmm.
The I don't like the policies, but
Sure.
beyond that, the uh, bringing down of kindness, the promoting bullying,
Hmm. Do you think he promotes
kindness.
those things?
Yes,
Interesting. I haven't seen that from him. Um,
yes,
okay.
I do. I think that the increase in hate crime could be exactly attributed to him. I think that he's a massive bully.
Okay.
I think he's breaking down our Constitution.
He's breaking it down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Firing the inspector generals.
Mm-hmm.
This is, we have three branches of government,
Mm-hmm.
three equal branches of government. The executive branch is not meant to be the strongest branch, that it wasn't designed that way.
So what do you say to when he says, I'm leaving it
Drink
up to the,
bleach,
say again?
drink bleach.
Well, he didn't say drink bleach. That was
He
taken
said
out of
inject it.
context.
He said
He
inject
did
it.
not. He said disinfectant. He said
He said we
disinfectant.
could inject it. Yeah.
Inject disinfectant, not bleach.
Inject
We have to quote
disinfectant.
it. We have to be fair here. I want to be
Okay,
fair.
but seriously, would you inject
No,
disinfectant into
well,
yourself?
it depends on what
Seriously.
disinfectant means. Of course, I wouldn't inject bleach or Lysol or any. That's a no
Shall
brainer. No, I wouldn't do that. That goes without saying. I think anybody with a common knowledge would understand that that's not what he was referring to. If you
But
believe that he
poison
was,
control got more
well,
calls.
you know why that is. Do you know why that is? Because I'll tell you why. Because that's a common
Can I
misconception.
drink?
No. That's funny. But the reason why that is because of COVID-19 being around. A lot of people went to the grocery stores and stocked up on a lot of cleaning supplies. They went really hard with it, just buying bleach, buying Lysol, buying all this stuff, and they're cleaning their homes with it. So as they're
Mm-hmm.
cleaning, they're more exposed to it, and as they were more exposed to it, the calls went up in crime. I mean, into those labs that were, you see a spike in the calls. But really, it was not because people were drinking bleach or injecting these things. It's because they were using them around their household to disinfect everything. So that's another common misconception. Now, I don't want to make you feel like I'm totally going, like trying to discredit anything you're saying, because you do bring up some very valid points. But I feel like a lot of the things that the president says and does is taken out of context on both sides of the media. But you do have a lot of points. He is not a very diplomatic guy. He's not very charismatic in the way that speaks to everybody. He does have
He's not kind.
yeah, he doesn't have a
He's
kind
not
way. Yeah,
kind.
he's not. And that
I,
goes back to what I think you were saying a little earlier, though, when you say no one likes a victim. I think that he kind of takes that mentality and says, you know what? I'm not going to victimize people, because it sets them it makes them look as if, how can I put it? It makes them look as the weaker person, or I'm just going to treat everybody across the board the same. Now, yeah, there's probably better ways of handling 1,000%, maybe, but I'd rather have somebody treat me the same way without saying, well, let me pander to you, let me be kinder to you so I don't hurt your feelings. I'd rather, treat everybody equally, because it comes across more genuine than somebody who says, oh, it's going to be okay, and then is totally different to the person to the other side of them. Like you say, you have different people in your network, so you try to treat people differently. That can start to come across as not genuine.
but I also don't think that you would be a bully, as I would not be a bully. I don't
Sure.
think you would teach that to your child.
Absolutely not.
And
Absolutely not.
and and this is the example that he sets with his
Okay.
name calling and his, this is the example that the head of this country is setting.
Sure.
And that's not okay with me. That's
Okay.
not okay with me.
I don't personally see it that way, but I never want, and I'm glad to hear you speak about it, because you're being honest about your feelings and how you feel, so that is important. So I don't want you to think I'm taking away from anything that you're saying at all. We just have a little bit of a difference of opinion on the issue.
That's fine.
And yeah, absolutely. And my whole thing is I agree with him. The main thing I can agree with you on, that he doesn't always handle it the best way that he could. And I think that's kind of what drew me to him. And the reason being, I say that because he's not a politician. I don't know if you recently saw the video of Joe Biden, his teleprompter cut off. And he's like trying to get people, like he's like, come on, tell me what to say. Like he's lost for words. So I'd rather have somebody speak from the heart, whether that's good or bad, and tell it like it is, or good or bad, that you know they're being genuine. And that's one thing that I see with Trump, because yeah, maybe what he's saying I totally disagree with, but I don't fear that he's lying or being disingenuous. I'd rather say, hey, look, I can't stand what he's saying, but he's being real. You know what I'm saying? I'm not worried in fear that he's not telling the truth, because that's where I fall with a lot of politicians, is I don't know if I'm ever being told the truth or not, you know?
Well, I mean, I'm also from New York, so he was from New York,
Mm-hmm.
and anyone in construction in New York, small companies in New York, he would hire them,
Mm-hmm.
and then he would, in the middle of the job, say, "I'm not going to pay you what I agreed to."
I've heard stories about that. I think some of those have been debunked, but I have heard stories about that.
That is true in New York and true in Atlantic City, because I'm from here.
Sure, sure.
So we know who he is from here.
Right.
And so I have a lot less rope for him
But there's a lot
than you
of
do.
people that which I can understand, especially I understand that. But there's a lot of people who also, like Rudy Giuliani, who's from New York and is quite fond of Trump. So, he and a lot of people have had positive things to say about Rudy as well. So, what is your relationship with how do you tie those
Rudy
together?
Giuliani did a good job after 9/11.
Mhm.
So there was a void. So the void that Trump has created in New York is filled by Cuomo, and Cuomo's presentations are clear and concise and gives us information. They're awesome. Um, Rudy Giuliani filled a void. He has since become somewhat of a monster, but
Mhm.
you know,
Well, I think I do agree that he kind of has a biased opinion, especially when he's Trump's attorney and all that stuff. So I definitely can understand with what you're saying there. Well, I really appreciate you kind of talking to me a little bit about that and giving me your perspective, because that was I don't want you to feel as if I'm not open to anybody on the left's ideas, because and the one reason I pressed you
mhm.
on that issue a little bit is because you said being a Trump supporter on my dating profile was just a no go for me, and which that for you that may not be what it is, but for me, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but for me that almost seems like I maybe I'm using the wrong word here, but an immature or childish way to look at things, because for me personally, I'm always open to hear what other people have to say, and think about, well, let me hear what they want, what they have to offer, whether I agree with them politically or not, because maybe, just maybe, not I'm able to find a medium ground where to say, hey, you know what? Maybe I was a little too far on that issue. And, she brought up a lot of really good points that, makes a lot of sense, and it kind of gets you adjusted a little bit. What do you think about that?
But see, that's what I might like in a friend. It's not what I want in a life partner. What I
Good
want in a
point.
life partner is a safe space.
That makes a
What
lot
I
of sense.
so given what I was on Bumble
Mm-hmm.
to be in love again, and in
Sure.
fact did fall in love again, and I didn't remember, I wrote my profile not for the other person,
Right.
just for me.
Right.
So it was, I grant you, completely selfish, but it didn't have to
Well, I
be
don't even
anything
know if
else.
it's selfish. Because like you said, you're going to go into this relationship. You're going to make,
Mhm.
invest time and effort. If you're going to put your best foot forward and really do what it takes to meet somebody, I don't find that that's necessarily selfish. And I think that's a great point when you say, you know what, I could be friends with that person, but I don't think for a life
Yep.
partner that's a great point. I think that's a great way of putting it. So, I mean, that makes a lot of
So you
sense.
and I are having a very civilized conversation. We
Sure.
don't necessarily agree,
Yeah.
but we're not ripping at each other,
Yeah, no,
right?
I feel like that's just immature. You see that way too much, and I don't
Yep.
want to. I just don't. I want to be better than that. Sometimes I find myself slipping into that, and usually it's I catch myself, I find myself, but I don't
Yep.
want to go down that road. It's just not who I would like to be as a person. I want to be open to ideas. I want to also convey my own thoughts and ideas, but I don't think it's very productive when you have somebody that you may disagree with to just go back and forth spatting at each other and neither one of you get anything accomplished. And you did open my eyes to some things about, so like, okay, I could see that. That makes sense. And when you talk about, I could see somebody like that as a friend, but not a life partner. I think that was a great point. So you did great with all of that. So I hope I hope you don't feel as if I've been, upsetting towards you or done anything wrong or anything like that, because I
Oh,
think you
no,
brought
no.
up great stuff.
I'm fine. I'm
Okay.
fine. It just, I'm from New York.
Hey, ain't nothing wrong with that. I understand. New York is known for being tough out there. You guys are tough, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate you answering my questions on it. So let me ask you to get back to a little bit. Why do you go by the name Bad Widow? How did that name come about?
Bad Widow. I'm going to turn on a light because it's getting really dark here.
Sure.
Um, so Bad Widow, I, after my husband died, I felt completely broken.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered that there was nobody who was actually sharing from the sort of extremely raw place I found myself, where I was a hot mess. I started dating on Bumble and I would go, "Don't touch me," burst into tears. I was not in good shape, and
Sure.
there was nobody talking from there.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of voices and writing and speaking once people were sort of through it.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't through it. Those people had nothing to offer me. And so then I thought, okay, well, if I'm not finding anything, if I'm not finding any resources that are answering my needs right now,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe I need to provide them,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm serve a thriving ecosystem, right? And so I just started speaking from the raw and from the vulnerable and from exactly what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that there were people who were also experiencing that gap. And so it was, Bad Widow was I'm going to blow up all the assumptions people have about how to treat me. And I'm going to share the resources that I am creating to get through myself. And I am going to, uh, I'm going to build something here. I'm going to build a platform. And Bad Widow was just that. I'm going up against what
Mm-hmm.
people think you should do and think you should say.
Right.
Because I kept getting angry at people because I'll give you a simple example. They would say, "How do you feel?"
Mm-hmm.
And my thought in my head was, "How do you think I feel?"
Right.
I'm looking forward to half my life
Mm-hmm.
potentially alone, being a cat lady,
Sure.
or something.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think I feel? And so I started educating people. It'd be better to say, "How do you feel right now?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel today?" Those were questions I could answer,
Makes
because
sense.
what I was looking at was a wasteland of grief.
Right. And I think that goes back to being clear and concise in your thoughts and your message, because you could say, "How do you feel?" Well, how do I feel about what? Today? Or about tomorrow? What's to come? Or what's already happened? That leaves a lot of ambiguity, right?
Exactly. And so I was getting mad. And if I would get mad, then people would leave. It
Right.
was not a good deal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so Bad Widow was, okay, I am not being supported. I'm being supported the way that other people think they would want to be supported in my shoes,
Mm-hmm.
which is not the same thing. But if I could be clear, then I could maybe be clear for me and everyone like me.
It's true.
I was an egregious example. Right after my husband died, he died in my arms, for
Mm-hmm.
breaths.
Oh.
And there was a friend who was meant to come over. So I called the friend and I said, "Don't come. He's just died." And he said, "Well, would you mind if I came over and saw the body?" Now picture it. I've got my husband who's just died in my arms. And someone is...
Yeah, like, you want to come over right now? Like, leave me alone, buddy. Yeah.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So there were things like that, and they were just, people are awkward around death, and they're awkward around loss, and they're awkward around transitions. And so they do and say stupid things. And it hurts everybody. So if you can actually educate them about how to do it better, the person who's suffering gets more support, the person who's trying to offer support feels appreciated. It's a win-win.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so before we wrap up here, I usually like to keep the show to an hour, but you've brought up a lot of interesting things, and we kind of ran over there, so that's awesome. So, why is including self-care in your schedule an essential business practice for thriving? So we know we're talking about healing. We've talked about, you dealing with this. At what point do you include the self-care, and why is that important?
So what happens with self-care is it actually expands your capacity to think and to take action and to take effective action. So if you're feeling depleted, it's really hard to get stuff done. Whereas if you can do something that fills you up, for me, it's singing is one of the things I do, going for a walk. Everyone's got their stuff, right? It could be journaling, it could be painting, it could be whatever. But if you fill yourself up before you are trying to get something done, you'll get through it much faster and more efficiently. Right? So the self-care can actually, you can use it to buffer yourself when you're going into a difficult conversation or a meeting that's going to be challenging or something that's going to take a lot of your energy. You need to bank some additional energy, and self-care does that.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, I want to say that was wonderful, Alison. I was so pleased to have you on the show today. Where can people find you? How should they go about contacting you if they want to ask you any questions? Are you open to that type of stuff? What can you tell everybody that you want them to know right now?
Absolutely. The best place to go is badwidow.com.
Okay.
And there is a link on there where you can actually schedule a conversation with me, and we can talk about your specific circumstances and
so you offer coaching services, is that right?
I do.
That's awesome. Well, that's awesome. I will make sure that your link is in the description of the video so people can reach out to you. I was ecstatic to have you on, and I appreciate you being understanding of my positions and talking with me and being open-minded. I think that's what the country needs a lot more of, so I appreciate everything that you had to say today, and you were a wonderful guest, and I appreciate you coming on. Hopefully maybe we can have you on in the future, and we could kind of recap and see how things have gone with you and your new lover there, and you can fill us in on all the exciting stuff. So I appreciate you coming on, Alison, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, Kevin. You too.
Oh, my pleasure. Take care, Alison. Have a good one.
Okay, bye. Stay safe.
Yes, you too. All right, everybody. So that was Alison Pena. Sorry we ran over a little bit on the hour mark, but I don't know. I felt like that was a great conversation we had about the politics a little bit because she brought up a lot of interesting points. We didn't always agree on everything politically, but she did have a positive message to share. She's somebody who went through a loss, and she's able to help people and coach people on how to bounce back from those losses and things that you can do. So if you're interested in speaking to Alison, you can reach out to her at www.badwidow.com. I have her website in the description below. But you guys have a great night. Thanks for tuning in to our 12th episode, and we will see you next week, Monday at 7 p.m. I do have another guest for you lined up. If you follow the K2 Podcast Facebook page, you can stay all up to date on all the newest guests that's going to be coming on, all the latest episodes. Please like this video and subscribe to our video on YouTube. You can also listen to us on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, Anchor FM, all of that good stuff. So thanks for tuning in to another great stream. I really appreciate all the support. Everybody have a great day and have a wonderful week. Take care.